Series-Cloaked, Chapter 1, Part 1. Late December, 1980. Moscow, USSR, Kremlin. Colonel Dmitry Laznikov, a former field agent of the KGB, was looking out his interior office window. He studied the bullpen of workers under his command. While some were scurrying to spruce up their desks and office space, Laznikov, a jovial 53-year-old former engineer turned spy, yearned for his days back in Montreal. His daydream was interrupted when one of his men deposited a new bundle of paper on Laznikov's already cluttered desk. As the cleanup continued, Laznikov's paper heap continued to grow. Beyond the bullpen were solid white doors that led to various laboratories. He made a mental note to visit each lab for inspection before President Brezhnev arrived later in the day. Laznikov leaned out the door and shouted a few more instructions, keeping his smile to himself. He watched as the pace of the men became even more frantic. He could not afford to be too cordial with the men under his command. Laznikov walked back to his desk and sat down in his comfortable leather chair. His mind wandered back in time to a few years earlier when he was recalled from his field work and ushered into the Politburo. Brezhnev and Laznikov were friends long before Brezhnev's rise to power. A key player in Brezhnev's ascent in the 1970s, Laznikov vowed his loyalty to his friend-turned-leader. With each passing year and despite his ill health, Brezhnev managed to accrue more power thanks to Laznikov's intelligence information. In 1977, Brezhnev removed Podgorny as chairman, becoming the top man in the Communist Party as well as the Soviet Union's ceremonial leader. Brezhnev was ruthless when he needed to be, and his success emerged from lobbying and the political prowess of a thinking man. Brezhnev knew how to make the Politburo his ally, even during the most arduous times. In 1971, the USSR accepted the détente offered by President Richard Nixon. The USSR's economy stalled from the isolation that the leaders before Brezhnev hailed as a mean for their country's success. The lackluster, failing economy was becoming the West's best weapon to undermine communism. However, in the 70s, fear of the USSR's nuclear capabilities was overreaching at best, exaggerated at worst by the US government. The two countries signed the détente as a way for Soviet-American relations to control the rhetoric of nuclear war and present calm, cool-headed leadership to the rest of the world. The United States did not realize that this détente only confirmed the perception to the rest of the world that these two nations equally possessed the means to obliterate each other, a fact most hoped would deter the other from pushing the button. Laznikov remembered sitting in the room with his fellow Politburo members and listening to Brezhnev convince them that détente was necessary. "We communists," Brezhnev began his speech, "have to string along with the capitalists for a while. We need their credits, their agriculture, and their technology. But we are going to continue massive military programs, and by the middle of the 1980s, we will be in a position to return to a much more aggressive foreign policy designed to gain the upper hand in our relationship with the West." Cheers and applause rose as Brezhnev emphasized the latter part of his last sentence. Détente proved to be the shot in the arm the Soviets needed. The GRU and the KGB were set to pounce on every opportunity to steal from the free enterprise systems of the West, particularly the United States. Laznikov smiled as he recalled the many different ways during the 1970s the Soviets capitalized, pun intended, on the openness of the United States businesses to share their science and technology advancements. It was no secret to the Soviet leaders that they trailed the West in computer and microelectronic technology by more than a decade. The decision of the détente agreement started when the Council of Ministers and the Central Committee established a new unit. This unit was known as the Directorate T and part of the KGB's first chief directorate. Its mission was to penetrate the research and development programs of Western economies. There were many participants in the Directorate T program involving many factions of the Kremlin: the State Committee of Science and Technology, the Military Industrial Commission, Military Intelligence, also known as the GRU, the Soviet Academy of Sciences, and the State Committee for External Relations supplied Directorate T with its collection requirements. It was no surprise that Brezhnev would recall Lesnikov from Montreal and appoint him to head up Line X, which was the operating arm of the Directorate T. Lesnikov prided himself on his genius for collecting the information the Soviets needed to draw even and then surpass the West. Détente provided new, creative ways of Soviet exploitation. Delegations of Soviet specialists traveled to the United States to visit firms and laboratories associated with their commissions. Lesnikov inserted Line X personnel, masquerading as delegates, on these trips. The typical ratio of KGB Line X agents to non-espionage-related delegates was 3-to-1. Lesnikov himself decided to attend a visit to Boeing. Just before entering the factory floor, Lesnikov and a few other Line X delegates excused themselves to the restroom. They applied adhesive to the bottom of their shoes. This method obtained metal samples for the laboratories of Line X to analyze and provided the Directorate with information on metals used by Boeing to build both commercial and military aircraft. Another example of their collection methods involved ranking scientists and managers of the Soviet computer and electronics industry. The managers requested and obtained a visa to visit the Uranus Liquid Crystal Watch Company of Mineola on Long Island. 3 days before the delegation's arrival, Lesnikov requested an expansion of the itinerary. The request included nearly all of the U.S. computer and semiconductor firms. By studying the U.S. regulations, Lesnikov knew that the Department of Defense would not have time to object to the expansive addition. As a result, Line X agents visited nearly all of the computer and semiconductor firms, acquiring precious secrets through obscure collecting methods as crafty as the adhesives on the soles of their shoes method. These endeavors continued, from proposing to Lockheed and Boeing that the Soviets would purchase 50 transport aircraft if the firms would build and equip a modern aircraft city in the USSR. This proposal made to each company resulted in Boeing and Lockheed playing off each other, allowing the Soviets to obtain technical data. These were only a few operations, and Line X reach touched all aspects of military and commercial systems. Lesnikov smirked at how stupid he thought the Americans were. His Line X operation continued undetected. 10 years later, information was still pouring into his directorate. To his knowledge, the United States had no idea they were helping to build a more powerful Soviet Union. In fact, each year in the last 10, the United States continued to laud the success of détente. His smile grew larger when he recalled, in 1975, the Apollo-Suez spacecraft joint mission, and how the Soviets successfully planted a KGB Line X agent among their crew to gain intelligence access to the U.S. space program. Only a few weeks before launch did the U.S. counterintelligence discover the Soviet agent. By then, the agent gathered all the useful information. Lesnikov counted that success as one of Line X's most brilliantly executed operations. Today was the 10th anniversary of Line X. In celebration, Lesnikov invited Brezhnev down to his unit to address his men. He wanted Brezhnev to boast to his workers how the information they were collecting, reviewing, and passing on to others was strengthening the USSR to surpass its enemies militarily in technology and science. The USSR was stronger than ever and now possessed the nuclear capability to strike the United States 5 times over. Lesnikov personally informed Brezhnev that a new cable channel in the United States aired government activities. On this channel, a report given by a five-star general to the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee proclaimed that the United States military only possessed the ability to strike the USSR 4 times over. It was a great day in the USSR, and Line X was a huge contributor to the success. Lesnikov couldn't wait to see the expression on his men's faces when Brezhnev painted the USSR prosperous future and the demise of the most inept adversary who unwittingly continued to help them. Lesnikov felt his heart skip a beat with excitement. Yes, Lesnikov thought, the '70s were very good for the Soviet Union, thanks to the détente with the United States.